My name is David Ashworth. For 23 years, I worked as an investigative reporter for the Chicago Tribune during that time. I've covered murders, disappearances, and tragedies that stained the pages of newspapers and were later forgotten by the world. But there are 5 cases, 5 stories I've never been able to forget. Cases that were never reported, not because there was a lack of evidence, but because the truth behind them was simply impossible to accept. Tonight, I'll share these stories with you. 5 events that took place in different parts of the United States. 5 situations that defy any logical explanation. Some involve the supernatural, others human evil in its purest form. All of them forever change the people who experience them. Turn off the lights. Make sure you're alone. Because what you're about to hear isn't just stories. It's fragments of a reality we'd rather pretend doesn't exist. A reality where horror isn't limited to movies, where evil walks among us, whispering in the dark corridors of our everyday lives. The first story took place in the heart of New York, on a winter night that still gives me nightmares. It was December 2019 when I got a call from Sarah Mendez, a 28-year-old nurse who had moved into a small apartment on the Upper East Side. Her voice trembled on the phone as she said, "Mr. Ashworth, I need to tell someone what's going on here. If I don't, I think I'll go crazy." Sarah had found apartment 4B through an online ad. The price was suspiciously low for the location, but the owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, explained that the apartment had been vacant for a few months and she was eager to rent it quickly. There was just one strange condition. Sarah was never to open the bedroom closet door. "It's just a storage space for the previous tenant's personal items," Mrs. Henderson said, handing over only a key. The closet door remained locked. The first few days were normal. Sarah worked double shifts at the hospital and came home exhausted, sleeping soundly until her alarm woke her. But on the 3rd night, something changed. She woke at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of someone moving around in her apartment. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from the living room. Sarah picked up the phone, ready to call the police, when the footsteps stopped outside her bedroom door. The silence that followed was oppressive, almost tangible. She waited, barely able to breathe, until she heard the sound of something being dragged down the hallway. The noise lasted for about 15 minutes, as if someone were rearranging furniture. In the morning, everything was exactly as she had left it. This repeated itself for a week, always at 3:17 a.m. Always the same footsteps, always the same silence outside her door, always the sound of something being dragged. Sarah installed a security camera in the living room, but every morning she found only hours of footage showing the room empty, until one night, the camera captured something. The recording showed Sarah sleeping when, at 3:17 a.m., her own silhouette appeared walking across the room. But that was impossible. She was clearly in bed throughout the recording. The figure in the room moved exactly like her, had her height, her gait, but their features were obscured by shadows that shouldn't have been there with the room's lighting. In the recording, this other Sarah walked up to the locked closet door and stood there, as if listening to something on the other side. After 15 minutes, she simply disappeared. She didn't fade out of frame. She didn't gradually dissolve. She simply ceased to exist between frames. Sarah showed me the recording when we met. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. "That's not me," she repeated. "I was sleeping. I know I was sleeping." We decided to investigate together. I contacted Mrs. Henderson, who initially refused to talk about the apartment. Only after considerable pressure did she reveal the truth. The previous tenant, a woman named Elena Vasquez, had committed suicide in the apartment 6 months earlier. She had locked herself in the closet and hanged herself with a makeshift rope made from bedsheets. Elena had a severe sleepwalking problem, Mrs. Henderson told me with a crack in her voice. Neighbors complained that she would walk around the apartment every night, always at the same time. They said she seemed to be looking for something, but could never find it. Mrs. Henderson handed me the closet key with trembling hands. Maybe it's time someone saw what's in there. I returned to the apartment that night. Sarah was at work. She'd taken extra shifts to avoid being alone in the apartment. I opened the closet, my heart racing. What I found was devastating. The interior walls were covered with hundreds of photos of Sarah. Not just recent photos, there were images that were clearly taken long before she moved into the apartment. Sarah coming home from work, Sarah buying groceries, Sarah hanging out with friends. Some of the photos were months old, long before she even knew the apartment existed. In the center of the back wall, a message was scrawled in what appeared to be dried blood. "You're in my place." The rope still hung from the closet ceiling, swaying gently despite the lack of draft. I called Sarah immediately, but she didn't answer. I rushed to the hospital where she worked, only to discover that she had called in 2 hours earlier, saying she felt nauseous. I rushed back to the apartment. I found the door open. Sarah was sitting in the middle of the room, her back to the entrance, perfectly still. When I called her name, she slowly turned around. Her eyes were completely white, rolled back, and her mouth moved silently, as if she were having a conversation with someone invisible. "She said I can stay," Sarah whispered in a voice that wasn't entirely her own. "Elena said there's room for both of us." The temperature in the apartment had dropped dramatically. I could see my breath, and the windows began to fog up. Sarah stood up with robotic movements and walked toward the open closet. I tried to stop her, but when I touched her arm, it felt like ice. Her skin was blue, and she didn't react to my touch. She walked into the closet and simply disappeared. It didn't fade away or dissolve. One moment it was there, the next, the closet was empty. The rope swung violently, as if someone had just touched it. I called the police. But how do you explain to officers that someone just dematerialized in front of you? The report was filed as a missing person. The apartment was sealed. Mrs. Henderson disappeared. Neighbors said she moved out that same night. 3 months later, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a recent photo of me entering the building, Chicago Tribune. On the back, written in the same handwriting I saw on the closet walls, "You've seen too much." Since then, I wake up every night at 3:17 a.m., not to noises or strange presences. I wake because I know, with absolute certainty, that someone is watching me. And sometimes when I look in the bathroom mirror on those silent mornings, I see two silhouettes reflected there, my own, and that of a young woman standing right behind me. Sarah was never found. Apartment 4B remains empty to this day. 6 months after Sarah's case, I received an email from a trucker named Marcus Williams. He had read one of my investigative pieces and said he had a story no one would believe. We agreed to meet at a roadside diner near Ostrander, Texas. Marcus was 52 years old, 28 of them driving American roads. He was the kind of man you picture when you think of a trucker. Gray beard, calloused hands, eyes that had seen it all. But when he began to tell me his story, his hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his coffee cup. "I've been driving Interstate 35 for decades," he began. "I know every turn, every gas station, every sign between Laredo and Dallas. But 3 weeks ago, driving home from a delivery in San Antonio, I took an exit I'd never seen before. It was around 2 a.m. when Marcus noticed the sign, Exit 127B, Millbrook Road. This was odd because he knew there was no exit 127B on that stretch of highway. There was only one exit, 127, which led to a small town called Cedar Creek. But he was tired, having driven for 12 hours straight, and perhaps he had gotten confused. He decided to keep going, but 5 minutes later, he saw the same sign again. Exit 127B, Millbrook Road. Impossible. He'd passed it just a few minutes ago. Marcus pulled the truck over to the shoulder and checked his GPS. According to it, he was exactly where he should be, heading straight down I-35. Worried that he might be suffering some kind of seizure or microsleep, Marcus decided to take the next exit and rest for a few hours. But the next exit he saw was again, Exit 127B, Millbrook Road. At this point, I was starting to panic, Marcus told me. But I thought maybe I should take this strange exit and stop at a gas station or motel to figure out where the hell I was. Millbrook Road was a single-lane road that cut through open fields. There were no streetlights, just the beam of the truck's headlights cutting through the pitch black. Marcus drove for about 15 minutes without seeing any buildings, no sign of civilization. He was about to make a U-turn when he saw lights ahead. It was a small town. There was no sign, but there was a main street with a few businesses, a gas station, a small motel, a 24-hour diner. Everything seemed normal, except for one thing. Despite the lights being on, there was no one on the streets, no cars parked, no movement in the windows of the businesses. Marcus stopped at the gas station. The pumps were working, but there was no attendant. Music was playing on the speaker, an old country song he couldn't identify. He decided to fill up anyway. He could pay later when he found someone. As the tank filled, Marcus noticed something strange. All the prices on the pump displays were showing 20-year-old prices. Gas was 89 cents a gallon. There were newspapers on a nearby counter, all dated October 15, 2003.
I thought maybe it was some kind of theme town or tourist attraction, Marcus told me, but it didn't make sense for it to be operating at 2 a.m. in the middle of nowhere. He decided to check out the motel. The reception door was open, and there was someone behind the counter, an elderly man reading a newspaper. Marcus approached and said, "Good evening," but the man didn't respond. He tried again, louder, but nothing.
It wasn't until Marcus walked around the counter that he saw the man was reading the same newspaper from 2003, and his eyes were completely white, pupilless. The man slowly turned his head toward Marcus and smiled. His teeth were yellow and rotten, and when he opened his mouth to speak, only a hoarse whisper came out. "You're late, very late." Marcus ran back to the truck, but when he turned the ignition, the engine wouldn't start. He tried again and again, desperately, as he watched from the cab as lights began to come on in the city windows. Silhouettes appeared behind the curtains, people moving with the same unnatural slowness as the man from the motel. Finally, the engine started, and Marcus sped down Millbrook Road, desperate to find the main highway. But no matter how hard he drove, the road seemed to stretch on forever. He glanced in the rearview mirror and saw that the city lights were still visible, even after 15 minutes on the road. Then, suddenly, he saw the headlights of another vehicle coming toward him. Marcus flashed his lights and honked, hoping the other driver would stop and help him. The vehicle slowed, and Marcus could see it was a truck identical to his. The other truck stopped side by side with Marcus's. The driver rolled down the window, and Marcus nearly screamed when he saw his own face staring back at him. It was himself, but 20 years older. The other Marcus smiled and said, "You should have taken exit 127A. At that moment, Marcus slammed on the accelerator and sped down the highway. He didn't look in his rearview mirror again until he saw the lights of I-35 ahead. When he finally returned to the main highway, it was 6A. 4 hours had passed, though to him it had only felt like 30 minutes. Marcus drove straight home and for a week tried to convince himself it had been a nightmare brought on by fatigue, until he received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a photo of himself filling up his truck at the ghost town gas station. On the back, written in red ink, "Exit 127B will always be waiting for you." Marcus never drove I-35 at night again. He changed his route and started working only daytime commutes. But he told me that sometimes, driving on other highways during the day, he sees signs that shouldn't be there. Exit 127B, Millbrook Road. They appear for only a few seconds, long enough for him to know he wasn't imagining it. The worst part, Marcus told me as we finished our conversation, is that I looked up I-35. In October 2003, there was a terrible accident near what would now be exit 127. A tanker truck exploded and killed 8 people, including the driver. They never fully identified the bodies because they were, well, you can imagine. Marcus showed me newspaper clippings of the accident. The main photo showed the wreckage of the truck, and although the image quality was poor, I could clearly see that it was identical to the truck Marcus had been driving. "Sometimes I wonder," he said as he got up to leave, "if I really escaped that city, or if I'm still there, driving in circles, waiting for the moment when I accept that I no longer belong in the world of the living." 6 months after our conversation, I received news that Marcus Williams had died in a truck accident on I-35 near exit 127. According to the police investigation, he had veered off the road for no apparent reason and struck a tree. There were no brake marks, as if he had simply given up driving. At the accident scene, they found a photo on the passenger seat, Marcus filling up his truck at a gas station not officially registered. On the back, the same message in red ink, "Welcome back." The case I'm about to tell you about came to me through psychiatrist Dr. Amanda Chen, who worked at a hospital in Los Angeles. In March 2020, she received a patient in a state of near Catonism, a 42-year-old man named Robert Hannigan, who was found by police walking naked along the Pacific Coast Highway at 4A. Fambit, repeatedly muttering, "They won't stop whispering." Robert was a successful architect, married to Jennifer for 15 years, and the father of 2 teenage daughters. There was no history of mental illness in the family. He didn't use drugs, and by all accounts, he was a stable and happy man. Until the family decided to move to a house in Malibu. Dr. Chen gave me audio recordings of his therapy sessions with Robert after he began speaking again, which took almost 2 months. What he shared during those sessions caused me to cancel my California vacation plans. The Malibu house had been a real find. Built in the 1960s, and it overlooked the ocean and cost half the price of similar properties. The real estate agent, a nervous man named Frank Martinez, explained that the low price was due to the house having sat vacant for 2 years after the death of the last owner. He didn't mention how the guy died, Robert said during one of their sessions. If he had, maybe none of this would have happened. The family moved in on a sunny Friday in February. The first few weeks were perfect. The girls loved having their own rooms with ocean views. Jennifer was thrilled to have space for her art studio, and Robert finally had the home office he'd always dreamed of. The first sign that something was wrong was what Jennifer initially described as plumbing problems. During the night, they could hear water running in the walls, as if someone had left a faucet running. Robert checked the entire house several times but found no leaks. He called a plumber, who also found nothing wrong. Then came the whispers. At first, they were so low they sounded like just the wind, or perhaps the sound of the ocean being distorted by the structure of the house. But gradually they became more distinct. They weren't clear words, but definitely human voices. Multiple voices overlapping in a constant, unintelligible conversation. It was like there was a party going on somewhere in the house, Robert told me through the recordings. But a party where no one was really having fun. The voices had an urgent tone, like they were trying to warn us about something. Robert assumed the problem was noisy neighbors or perhaps the echo of beach conversations being amplified by the local geography. But then his youngest daughter, 13-year-old Emma, started acting strangely. Emma had always been an outgoing child, but suddenly she became withdrawn and quiet. She would spend hours sitting in her room, seemingly talking to someone, but always alone. When Jennifer asked who she was talking to, Emma replied, "The people in the walls. They tell me stories about when they lived here." Jennifer and Robert initially thought it was just the imagination of a teenager adjusting to a new home. Until the night Robert woke up to Emma standing over his bed at 3 a.m., whispering, "Daddy, they want to talk to you too. They say you need to hear the truth about what happened here." Robert took Emma back to his room, but she resisted, insisting that he needed to hear the voices properly. It was that night that Robert truly paid attention to the whispers for the first time, and what he heard left him cold. These weren't random conversations. They were accounts, detailed, overlapping accounts of violent deaths, graphic descriptions of murders, suicides, accidents. The voices seemed to be competing to tell their stories, each more horrific than the last. Robert researched the house's history and discovered that it had changed ownership 12 times in 50 years. This was unusual for a high-value Malibu property. Even more disturbing, with each change of ownership, there were records of deaths or disappearances in the family that had sold the house. The Patterson family, who lived there from 1987 to 1994. Their 16-year-old son jumped off the cliffs near their house. The Rodriguez family, 1994-1999. Their mother was found dead in the bathtub, an apparent suicide. The Thompson family, 1999 to 2005. They completely disappeared. The house was found empty with all their belongings still there, as if they had simply vanished. I started documenting the whispers, Robert said. I would record them at night, trying to understand what they were saying. The recordings always came out empty or just static, but I could hear them perfectly with my own ears. The situation deteriorated rapidly. Emma began talking more and more to the people in the walls, often staying up late into the night carrying on detailed conversations. Jennifer began having violent nightmares every night. She always dreamed she was drowning, even when she was on dry land. and Robert began to see things. Silhouettes moving around the house in the early hours of the morning, shadows that didn't correspond to any physical object, reflections in mirrors and windows that showed people who weren't actually there, people in different clothes, from different eras, but all with the same expression of despair and terror. The worst part, Robert said during one of his most intense sessions, was that I was starting to recognize some of them. They were the previous families, the Pattersons, the Rodriguezes, all of them. They were trying to warn me, trying to tell me what really happened in that house. The climax came one night in March. Robert woke to find Emma screaming in his room. When he ran to check on her, he found her standing in the center of the room, talking to the blank walls. But this time, he could hear the other side of the conversation. It was a child's voice, clear as if it were standing right next to him. "You have to leave. He's coming back. The man who built the house is coming back. And when he comes, you'll never be able to leave again." Robert asked who had built the house. The voice replied, "Thomas Whitmore. He killed 17 people here before he died. The people who live in the house become part of his collection." At that moment, the temperature in the room dropped dramatically. Robert could see his breath, and the windows began to fog up. Then he heard something that made him pick up Emma and run to the room where Jennifer slept. Heavy footsteps coming up the stairs, accompanied by a male voice humming a lullaby. Robert woke Jennifer, and they tried to leave the house with the children, but all the doors were locked. The keys didn't work. The locks seemed welded shut. The windows wouldn't break, even when Robert tried to use a chair to smash them. They were trapped in the house for 3 days. During those 3 days, the paranormal activity intensified exponentially. The whispers became screams. Objects flew around the house for no apparent reason. The entire family began seeing Thomas Whitmore, a tall, thin man dressed in 1960s clothing, always smiling predatorily. He followed us around the house, Robert recalled, never speaking to us directly, but he was always there, always watching. And the other people, the previous families, became more and more desperate, trying to warn us not to accept the invitation. On the 3rd day, Emma disappeared. She simply wasn't in the house anymore. Robert and Jennifer searched desperately for her, but it was as if she'd been absorbed into the walls themselves. It was then that Thomas Whitmore spoke to them for the first time. "Your daughter has accepted my invitation," he said in a voice that echoed from every room simultaneously. "She will keep the other children company forever. You can join her, or you can leave. But if you leave, she stays." Jennifer completely collapsed. Robert had to make an impossible decision: abandon Emma, or condemn the entire family. It was then that he heard Emma's voice coming from the walls. "Daddy, don't accept it. Run. They're lying. If you accept it, you won't be able to save anyone." In a moment of utter desperation, Robert broke a window with an iron bar he found in the basement. This time, the glass shattered. He and Jennifer escaped the house and ran to the beach, where they called other residents for help. When police arrived at the house 2 hours later, it was completely empty. There was no sign of Emma, nor of any paranormal activity. The house appeared normal, just an empty property with furniture covered in dusty sheets. Robert spent the next few months trying to find Emma, hiring private investigators, and pressuring the police, but she had simply vanished from existence. There was no record of her having lived in the house, attended school in Malibu, or even existed, as if reality itself had been rewritten. The last thing Robert remembered before being found on the Pacific Coast Highway was driving back to the house one last time, determined to get in and not leave without Emma. He remembered nothing else after parking in the driveway. When Dr. Chen referred me to this case, she also gave me the address of the Malibu house. Against my better judgment, I drove there one December afternoon. The property was for sale again, with a real estate sign out front. I called the real estate agent, the same Frank Martinez who had sold it to the Hannigan family. Frank was reluctant to talk about the house, but when I mentioned I was a journalist, he agreed to meet me there. He arrived 20 minutes later, visibly nervous. "Look, I know what you're thinking," he said before I could even ask any questions, "but I need to sell these houses. It's my job, and technically, nothing confirmed has ever happened on this property." I asked about Thomas Whitmore, the original builder. Frank turned pale. How did you know that name? Where did you hear that name? Frank told me that Thomas Whitmore had actually existed. He was a local architect who built several homes in Malibu in the 1960s, but there were no official records of deaths associated with him or the house. Those are just stories people make up when they can't explain why they don't feel comfortable in a property, he insisted. But when we entered the house, Frank began to sweat profusely. We were only inside for 15 minutes, long enough for me to hear the whispers. They were exactly as Robert had described, multiple, overlapping voices, urgent, trying to tell stories I couldn't fully understand. Frank quickly led me back outside. "Did you hear anything strange in there?" he asked. I confirmed that I had heard voices. Frank sighed heavily. "Every family that's ever lived here has heard those voices, and they've all lost someone. I just hope that eventually I find a family that's strong enough to break this pattern." 3 weeks after my visit, I received a call from the Malibu police. Frank Martinez had been found dead in his office, an apparent suicide. He'd left a one-line note. "I can no longer be responsible for feeding the household. The Malibu house is still for sale. The price has been halved again." In August 2021, I received a frantic call from a woman named Dr. Lisa Warren, a wildlife biologist coordinating wildlife research at Glacier National Park in Montana. Her voice was so raised with panic that I initially thought it was a prank call. "Mr. Ashworth, I've read your articles about unexplained events. I need to tell someone what happened to my research team. If I don't, I think I'll go crazy. Or worse, I think I'll end up like them." Dr. Warren coordinated a grizzly bear monitoring project in the northern region of the park. Her team consisted of 5 experienced researchers: Dr. Michael Torres, zoologist; Sarah Kim, animal behaviorist; James Copper, a park ranger with 15 years of experience; and David Chen, wildlife photographer. The project was supposed to last 2 weeks, with the team camping in a remote area of the mountains to document bear migration patterns during late summer. It was work they had all done dozens of times before. Nothing could have prepared them for what they encountered in the mountains. The first sign that something was wrong was the silence. "You have to understand," Dr. Warren explained to me, "even in the most remote areas of the park, there are always natural sounds. Wind in the trees, running water, birds, insects, small animals moving. Nature is never truly silent. But in that region, it was as if someone had pressed a mute button on the entire world." The team set up camp in a clearing near a small glacial lake. During the first day, they managed to spot and photograph a few bears, but noticed that the animals seemed agitated, constantly looking toward a dense pine forest on the western side of the valley. It was James Krause, the most experienced ranger, who first voiced what everyone was feeling. "In 15 years of working in these mountains, I've never seen animals behave like this. It's like they're avoiding something." On the second night, David disappeared. He had gone out to photograph the mountains at sunrise, something he did routinely. When he didn't return by noon, the team organized a search. They found his camera near the tree line, but there were no signs of a struggle, suspicious footprints, or any indication of where he might have gone. "The strange thing was that the camera was still working," Dr. Warren told me. "The last photos David took showed the pine forest, but there was something wrong with the images. They were completely in focus, well composed, but there was nothing in them. Just empty, lifeless trees." James radioed the disappearance and requested a rescue team, but the response he received was disturbing. The dispatcher said there was no record of any authorized research team in that area of the park. According to official records, the area had been closed to research for 6 months due to unstable geological activity. That was impossible, Dr. Warren insisted. "I had all the authorizations, all the documentation, but when we tried to send digital copies via satellite, all our files were corrupted or simply empty." The situation deteriorated rapidly. On the third night, Sarah Kim woke up screaming, saying she'd seen David standing at the edge of the camp, beckoning her to follow him into the woods. When the others woke and turned on their flashlights, there was no one there. Sarah insisted he was right there, Dr. Warren recalled. She said David was smiling, but there was something wrong with the smile. She said it was too wide, like he had extra teeth. Dr. Torres suggested Sarah might be suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder over her colleague's disappearance. But the next morning, they found footprints around the camp. Barefoot human footprints, but with strange characteristics. They were too large, with too long toes, and appeared to have been made by someone walking exclusively on tiptoe. The footprints led straight into the pine forest. We decided to leave the next morning, Dr. Warren told me. James knew a trail that would take us back to the main road in about 6 hours. But as we started walking, the trail changed. The trail James had known for 15 years was simply gone. In its place was dense, impassable forest. The GPS didn't work, showing only impossible coordinates that placed them in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The compass kept spinning, unable to find magnetic north. They decided to follow the stream that fed the lake, reasoning that all streams eventually led to larger rivers and, ultimately, civilization. But after 4 hours of walking, they arrived back at the same lake where they had camped. It was impossible, Dr. Warren repeated several times during our conversation. We followed the stream in a straight line, steadily descending. There was no way we could have turned around and ended up back where we were. On the 4th night, Dr. Torres disappeared. They heard her voice at 3 a.m., calling for help from somewhere in the woods. James and Dr. Warren tried to follow her, but as they approached, the voice seemed to move away. They continued following for almost an hour until they realized the voice wasn't coming from the woods. It was coming from underground. We stopped following the voice when we realized Michael was calling us down, literally asking us to dig a hole and go down to him, Dr. Warren said, his voice shaking. We ran back to camp. In the morning, they found a pile of Dr. Torres's clothes neatly folded next to his tent. His boots were perfectly aligned, as if he had methodically undressed before leaving. There was no further sign of him. Only Dr. Warren, James, and Sarah remained. Sarah had completely stopped talking and spent the entire time staring blankly into the pine forest, occasionally waving as if greeting someone in the trees. It was James who suggested they try to go through the forest. "Whatever's going on here," he said, "it's keeping us trapped. The only way out might be on the other side of those trees." They entered the forest on the morning of the 5th day. Dr. Warren described the experience to me as walking through a dead cathedral. The trees were gigantic, taller than any pine she had seen before, and formed a canopy so dense that almost no sunlight penetrated. The ground was covered in a thick layer of pine needles that completely muffled the sound of their footsteps. And there were the whispers. These weren't human voices, Dr. Warren told me. It was as if the trees themselves were whispering to each other. In some language I couldn't identify, but somehow I understood. They were talking about us, about how many of us were left, about how long until the gathering is complete. After 2 hours of walking, they reached a clearing in the center of the forest. In the middle of the clearing was a structure that Dr. Warren described as an impossible cabin. It was made of tree trunks, but the trunks were too large, coming from trees that didn't grow in that region. The wood was dark, almost black, and seemed damp despite the dry climate. There was smoke coming out of the chimney, Dr. Warren recalled, and we could hear sounds coming from inside. Laughter, talking, as if there was a party going on. James walked over to the cabin window and looked inside. When he pulled back, his face was completely white. "It's them," he whispered. "David and Michael are in there. They're having fun." Dr. Warren looked out the window and saw David and Dr. Torres sitting at a rustic table, laughing and chatting with several other people she didn't recognize. Everyone seemed extremely happy and relaxed. David waved to her through the window and motioned for her to come in. There was something profoundly wrong with the scene, Dr. Warren told me. Everyone was smiling, but they were identical smiles, as if someone had drawn the same smile on different faces, and their eyes were completely black. At that moment, Sarah ran toward the cabin door, shouting that she wanted to join her friends. James tried to stop her, but she pushed him away with surprising strength and entered the cabin. Through the window, Dr. Warren saw Sarah sit at the table, and immediately her face took on the same expression of artificial happiness as the others. They all looked at us through the window, Dr. Warren recalled, and started waving, beckoning us in. Their mouths moved in unison, saying the same thing over and over. "Come home, come home, come home." Dr. Warren and James ran back through the forest. This time, they found the exit quickly, as if the forest were giving them permission to leave. They arrived back at camp, grabbed only the essentials, and walked steadily until they reached the main road 36 hours later. The most disturbing thing, Dr. Warren told me, is that when we reported the disappearances, we discovered that David, Michael, and Sarah had never existed. There were no employment records, no families searching for them, no evidence that they had participated in the research project. It was as if they had been erased from reality. Dr. Warren sent me photos he'd taken during the expedition. The first images showed her 5-person team working at the camp, but in the photos taken after the disappearances, it was just her and James. In the first photos, where David, Michael, and Sarah should have been, there were only empty spaces. But it wasn't as if the people had been edited out of the images. It was as if they'd never been there. James lasted 3 months after we returned, Dr. Warren told me, his voice breaking. He started saying he heard voices calling him back to the mountains. He said our friends were lonely, that they wanted us to join them at the cabin. One morning, he simply didn't show up for work. They found his car in the Glacier National Park parking lot, but they never found him. Dr. Warren has stopped working in field research. Now she teaches biology at a university in Seattle, but she told me that every night she dreams of the pine forest. Like I see them through the cabin window, she told me. David, Michael, Sarah, and now James. They're all smiling that identical smile, waving at me, and every morning when I wake up, I want to drive back to Montana. I researched the area where the team had camped. According to official records, that area of the park is permanently closed due to geological instability. There are no records of any bear research projects approved for that area in the last 5 years. But there are records of disappearances. 17 people have disappeared in that specific area of the park in the last 20 years. All were researchers, photographers, or nature enthusiasts. None have been found. The last case I'm going to share with you happened just 6 months ago. And honestly, I'm still trying to fully process what happened. Unlike the other stories, this time I was the primary witness to the events. In February 2025, I received an email from a woman named Marie Boudreau, who lived in a small bayou in southern Louisiana. She had read some of my articles online and said her community was experiencing something that defied rational explanation. Marie was a descendant of one of the founding families of Cypress Hollow, a community of just 200 people that had existed for over 150 years deep in the Louisiana swamps. According to her, the town was changing in ways no resident could explain. Mr. Ashworth, she wrote, our city is growing, but not naturally. Buildings are appearing overnight. Streets that weren't there yesterday morning are there today. And the new people who are arriving, there is something deeply wrong with them. I decided to go to Cypress Hollow, partly out of journalistic curiosity, but mainly because Marie had attached some photos of the town to her email. In a photo taken in January, Cypress Hollow looked exactly what you'd expect. A few simple houses, a small church, a gas station, all connected by dirt roads. But in the February photo, the town had doubled in size, with old-looking buildings that clearly hadn't been built recently. The drive to Cypress Hollow was a journey through the most remote parts of Louisiana. I left the last paved highway about 25 miles before reaching town, following increasingly precarious dirt roads through dense swamps. For the last hour of the drive, I didn't see a single other person or vehicle. When I finally arrived in Cypress Hollow, I was shocked by what I found. The town was much larger than the photos suggested. There were at least 50 buildings, houses, shops, even a small town hall that Marie hadn't mentioned in her descriptions. All the buildings had consistent late 19th century architecture but were in perfect condition. Marie greeted me at the town entrance. She was a woman in her 60s, with the tired eyes of someone who hadn't slept well in weeks. "Thank you for coming," she said. I was starting to think I was going crazy. Marie took me on a tour of the city, explaining what had changed. "This bakery didn't exist last week," she said, pointing to a century-old-looking shop. "And this barber shop appeared 3 days ago. The strangest thing is they all have stories. There are historical plaques, records in the City Hall archives, as if they'd always existed. We stopped in front of City Hall, an impressive 2-story building that clearly couldn't have been secretly constructed overnight. Marie showed me a bronze plaque out front. Cypress Hollow City Hall, established 1847, renovated 1923. This sign didn't exist yesterday, Marie told me. I'd been walking past here every day for 60 years. This town hall never existed before this week. Inside City Hall, I met the mayor, a man named Aldrich Blackwood, who introduced himself as if he'd held the position for decades. He was a tall, thin man in old-fashioned formal clothes. When I asked how long he'd been mayor, he replied, "My family has ruled Cypress Hollow for 5 generations." That was impossible. Marie had told me that the town had never had a mayor. It had always been governed by an informal council of older residents. "Mr. Blackwood," I asked, "could you show me some historical records of the city?" He smiled and led me to a file cabinet in the basement of City Hall. What I saw there left me speechless. There were hundreds of files documenting the history of Cypress Hollow since 1847. Birth, death, marriage, tax records, all meticulously organized. And according to these documents, the town had always had the current population and all the buildings I'd seen. But there was something disturbing about the records. All the death dates were in future years. People who were clearly alive had death certificates dated 2026, 2027, 2030. When I asked about this, Blackwood simply said, "We have a very efficient filing system here." I spent 3 days in Cypress Hollow, staying at a bed and breakfast that Marie insisted had appeared out of nowhere the week before. During those 3 days, I witnessed things I still can't rationally explain. The first night, I woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of construction coming from the street. I looked out the window and saw several people working on a new house, but they worked in complete silence, moving in perfect synchronization, as if they were puppets controlled by the same operator. Within 3 hours, the house was completely built, furnished, and with a family moving in. "Have you seen the Hendersons' new house?" Marie asked me at breakfast, as if the Henderson family had always been in town. On the second night, I discovered that I myself was being integrated into the town's history. I found a local newspaper which Marie swore had never existed before, with an article about my visit. According to the paper, I was a renowned journalist who frequently visited Cypress Hollow to document our rich cultural history. There was even a photo of me in front of City Hall that I definitely didn't remember taking. On the third morning, Marie came to me in a panic. "David, you need to leave today," she said. "Yesterday I found your name in the city records. According to the documents, you moved to Cypress Hollow in 1987 and never left." I went to City Hall and confirmed what Marie had found. There was a complete file on me as a longtime resident of the town. Income tax documents, voting records, even a marriage certificate to a woman named Eleanor Ashworth, whom I had never met, but who apparently lived in a house on Main Street. "Ah, Mr. Ashworth," Blackwood said when he saw me looking through the files. "It's good to see you again. Eleanor was asking when you'd be coming home." I left City Hall and went straight to my car, but it wasn't where I'd parked. In its place was a 1987 model, with the same license plate, but clearly much older. My car keys worked perfectly in it. Inside the car, I found decades of personal documents, insurance cards, maintenance records, even photos of me and Eleanor over the years. Photos I didn't remember taking, but in which I clearly appeared to be aging gradually. That's when I realized the townspeople were looking at me differently, no longer as a visitor, but as someone who belonged. Children waved to me on the street and shouted, "Hi, Mr. Ashworth," as if they'd known me for years. Marie found me as I was trying to understand what was happening. "David, you need to leave now," she said urgently. "I can see in your eyes that you're starting to accept this. If you stay another day, you'll forget there's a world outside of Cypress Hollow." She was right. I was starting to feel comfortable in the city. Part of me wanted to meet Eleanor, see the house where we lived, understand my life in that community. It was a warm, inviting feeling, like returning home after a long trip. Marie took me back to where I had originally parked my car. My real car was there, exactly as I had left it. The 1987 car was completely gone. "Go away now," Marie told me, "and don't look back. If you look back as you're leaving, the city will pull you back in." I drove along the winding dirt roads, fighting the urge to turn around and go home. It was the hardest 30 minutes of my life, resisting the overwhelming urge to return to a life I knew. Logically, I had never lived. When I finally reached the paved highway, I stopped the car and checked my phone. There were text messages from Eleanor Ashworth. "David, when are you coming home? I miss you. The city isn't the same without you." I blocked the number and drove straight to the airport, catching the first flight back to Chicago. 2 weeks later, I received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a property deed for a house in Cypress Hollow, Louisiana, registered in my name since 1987. On the back of the deed was a message written in the same handwriting as on the death certificates I'd seen in the archives. "Your home will always be waiting for you." These are the 5 stories I've never forgotten. 5 cases that challenge our understanding of reality, that remind us that the world we know can be much more fragile and much stranger than we imagine. For years, I've tried to find connections between these events. I've looked for geographic patterns, significant dates, commonalities that might explain why these things happen to these specific people in these specific places. And then 2 weeks ago, I found the connection. I was organizing my files when I noticed something that had completely escaped me. In each of these 5 stories, there's a person who disappeared from official records after the events. Sarah Mendez of New York, Marcus Williams of Texas, Emma Hannigan of California, Dr. Michael Torres, Sarah Kim, and David Chen of Montana, and Marie Boudreau of Louisiana. I decided to research Marie Boudreau since she had been my most recent source. What I discovered made me question everything I thought I knew about these cases. Marie Boudreau never existed. There are no birth records, no school records, no driver's license, nothing. There's no evidence she ever lived. And when I tried to find Cypress Hollow on a current map, the town simply doesn't exist. The area where it should be is marked only as uninhabited swamp. I started researching the other people, Sarah Mendez, Marcus Williams, all of them, and I discovered the same thing. According to all official records, these people never existed. It's as if they had been completely erased from reality after their encounters with the inexplicable. But there's something even more disturbing. While researching, I found references to these same stories being told by other journalists, in other cities, at other times. The story of Apartment 4B was reported by a journalist in Boston in 1995, but under different names and a different address. The ghost road in Texas was documented by a reporter from Dallas Morning News in 2003. Always the same stories, always with small variations, always with people who disappear from the records after the events. It's as if these stories were models, as if someone or something was using these terrifying experiences over and over again, applying them to different people in different places, gleaning something from these interactions. And then last night I got an email that made me realize the true nature of what's going on. The sender was David Ashworth, me. The email had been sent from my own address, but I hadn't written it. The message was simple. "Thank you for sharing our stories. Now it's your turn to join us." Attached to the email was a photo. It was me, standing in front of Cypress Hollow City Hall, smiling the same artificial smile I'd seen on David and Dr. Torres's faces through the window of that cabin in Montana. But I remember resisting the temptation to stay in Cypress Hollow. I remember leaving the city, returning to Chicago, writing these stories. Or is that just what whoever's controlling this wants me to remember? I look at my hands as I type these words, and for a moment, I'm not sure if they're actually mine. I look around my office, and everything feels slightly off, as if it's a perfect but artificial reproduction of where I should be working. The truth is, I don't know where I am anymore. I don't know if you who are listening to this story are real, or if you are part of the same illusion that may be keeping me trapped. I don't know if these words I'm speaking are truly mine, or if I'm just reciting a script that was written for me. But I know one thing. If you've heard these stories this far, if you've made it this far with me, then you're a part of this now too. You've become a witness to these events, and witnesses have an important role to play. Maybe the only way to escape is to not try to escape. Maybe the only way to win is to accept that we've already lost. Or maybe this is just another story within an endless story, and we're just characters in a narrative that was never intended to end. I can feel myself being watched now, not just by one person, but by all of them. Sarah, Marcus, Robert, Dr. Warren, Marie, all watching me, waiting for me to accept my place among them. And those of you listening, You can feel it too, can't you? That feeling that someone is standing right behind you as you hear these words. Don't turn around and look. Not yet. If you enjoyed these stories, click the link below and discover even deeper horrors in our exclusive ebook. But remember, once they cross that line, once they allow themselves to go deeper, there is no guarantee that they will be able to return to the reality they knew before. The choice is yours, it always has been.